resident of Moscow, so you know I'm not an expert, because to be an expert, you know, you have to have traveled at least 100 miles. So maybe when I go to Regan's next, that'll work. I have 3 separate PowerPoints on the 3 key issues on the Lower Snake River dams. And so I've extracted some of the key slides from some of those. So this is kind of a compressed version, as it were. And some of these are going to go by pretty fast because I want to be sure we have a chance for questions and answers. So I'll shoot for, Diane said about 12:45, and then we'll have that Q&A. My bottom line is we have a problem, and I mean all of us, whether in Moscow or Idaho or the Pacific Northwest. We have a problem that hopefully we can solve, and that problem, of course, involves salmon, and it involves orcas, and it involves freight transportation, get that grain to market, and hydropower. And so that's going to be my focus on those 3 areas. So I'm not a very good PowerPoint person, as you can see, and I see the love of the colors. And I'm sort of one of those, just the facts, man. So let's get started. Again, those are 3 areas that we're going to get some information about, and I suspect that you're going to be a little surprised at some of the information today. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Okay, we all theoretically know where the dams are, but I just put it up there just to remind us, and in fact specifically one dam. Here we have Lower Granite, here's Moscow about here. The dams are approximately 100 feet high and about 30 miles between each dam. I mean, one's 101 feet and so forth, but if you just think in terms of 100 feet, you're in good shape. Oh, I'm sorry, note this, because you may be seeing some information out there that says, gosh, the freight transportation is on the increase. And they look at the Corps of Engineers data and say, yeah, it's up to 4.1 million tons. But in that, in that figure is all of the petroleum that comes up right here and is just in a small little piece of the Snake River. None of that comes through Ice Harbor Dam. So, when we're talking about, today I'm talking about the dam and reservoir project, the Lower Snake project. And so there, the total freight, when we look at Ice Harbor, the total freight is about 2.6 million, which is a lot different than 4.1. Okay, we'll take a first look at freight transportation, and you'll notice the word new perspectives. A lot has happened in the last 15 years in terms of freight transportation, salmon, and hydropower. A lot has happened. And so this is, hopefully as about up to date as we can get. This is the Snake River container on barge. It's called COB, container on barge records. It's right off the Port of Lewiston. Port of Lewiston was the only port that shipped containers. And so in 2000, right there, we had 17,590 TEUs, and that just means a 20-foot equivalent unit. So that's kind of how they measure container traffic. So most containers are 40 feet long. So that would mean more like 9,000 40-foot containers. And here we go to 2004, here, and 2015, the Port of Portland ceased their container operations. And so that was the big reason given for the loss of containers. It was because of labor problems over there in 2015 and et cetera. But note what had happened before 2015. The Port of Portland and their container operation over 30 years they had been profitable too. And in fact, the last year that the Port of Portland ran Pier 6, they lost $19 million. So this is kind of interesting too. Some of you might find it interesting anyway. 2012, that's the year that the Port of Lewiston decided they really needed a larger container dock. 2012. And so they said, with all the container traffic we're getting, we need a bigger container dock. And so they spent $2.8 million of taxpayer money to extend their container dock. And of course, shortly thereafter, all the container traffic was gone.
Lynn, what's the bump in 2007?
Pardon?
What accounts for the bump in 2007?
I don't know. You know, good question, Nancy, but I don't really know what it is. I do certainly see the trend.
That was 2 years later.
So I thought it might be good to look at more isolated, just Lower Granite Pool, basically Lewiston, Clarkston, and Port of Wilma. And so in 1994 here, we have, actually I think it's 1,234, just a little bit over 1,200 loaded barges that went through Lower Granite Dam. And it didn't matter which direction, but you know, we counted lower, we counted loaded barges. And so here you can see the trend there.
This is containers.
That figure is 344.
This is bulk too, or just containers?
Pardon? Oh, no, well, all shipping.
So
Okay, all shipping, all, every,
haven't the bulk containers got a lot bigger over the years?
the bulk.
Yeah.
No, there's the number
Quite a bit of the barges.
of loaded barges
It's about half the barges.
that go, yes, loaded barges that go through Lower Granite Dam. And so that in 1994, there was a barge, about 3.5 barges a day. And now it's less than 1 per day. So again, there's been a dramatic change in barging traffic. Just a second, I need to get some water. Well, you think it's water, you don't really know. Crazy. So the Corps of Engineers keeps tabs on all the traffic and all the waterways and so forth. And this is the 14 key waterways in the inland waterway system. And here's the Mississippi. And by the way, these are what's called ton miles. In other words, shipping 1 ton, 1 mile is a ton. And so these are in billions, because of course 1 barge at 3,500 tons going 10 miles is a lot of, you know, ton miles. So anyway, there are the 14 key rivers in the inland waterway system. And you notice if you have more than 3 billion ton miles, you're a large shipper. I mean, a large river, I mean, a big use river. If you have from 1 to 3 billion ton miles, you're average. And a small river is defined as, in terms of ton miles, is defined as less than 1 billion ton miles. If you're looking for the snake, it's over here.
See the number.
A question on that.
Zero.
Yeah.
I see the Columbia right there in the middle at 2.1. Was that before the Port of Portland shut down their containers and stuff?
We're talking total freight. So it's not just container, this is all that we.
Yeah, but is, what's the date on this?
Well, let's see if I have it. This is my notes. That's which slide, what number is that?
That would be number 6.
6. I don't have anything written down here, so, and then let's stop just a second and say, I mean, I love it if you ask questions as we go, And then we'll kind of stretch that out a little bit, and so we won't end up, I mean, we won't have a Q&A then, I mean, that could, you know. But I guess I'm not sure how to answer it. But you can see, oh, by the way, this lists the snake at 0.3 billion tons. They're actually about 2.8 billion tons. And if you tripled the amount of barge traffic on the lower Snake River, they would still be a small use river. Tripled. When I was a kid, I grew up in Lewiston, and I still can remember going down the train out here and down to Lewiston from Minnesota with my grandmother and my two sisters. And so today I ride that, road, same trail on my bike. And so this is kind of neat. I mean, I kind of have that feeling about it. That was in 1948. So one of the big promises in the 1950s and 60s about barge traffic was that the barge slackwater navigation was going to bring us a lot of prosperity. In fact, I remember some people said Lewiston would probably get to be bigger than Spokane. And so here's the last 25 years of job growth. Okay? Growth in jobs, growth in covered jobs actually, which the Department of Labor defines as every job that includes Social Security, credits, which is, they said, about 93% of all jobs. And so this is that growth since 1993. So we have 25 years of growth. And here's the state average, the dotted line. Okay, that's the state average, and you see a number of regions. The state is divided into 6 regions, and so they're north central and north and southwest and so forth. So that's what this represents. These colors are different regions of the state. And Lewiston and Lathrop County and Nez Perce County, and basically Region 2, including Idaho County and Clearwater County. Here's been their job growth. So I don't know whether transportation has saved the economy around here. I'm confident if we took out Lathrop County and reassessed, it would be lower than this. So basically, Region 2 has not recovered yet from the 2008 Great Recession. All the other regions, I don't know, maybe that one hasn't been, but anyway, we certainly have. But, most of the state is booming in terms of employment, in terms of population growth and so forth, but certainly not Region 2. Here's the barge. Take a good look because you don't see many of them anymore. And it's scarce. And the caption says the Water Snake River Navigation Channel is paved with taxpayer dollars. And I have for some time have used a figure of $25,000 subsidy on every barge that leaves Lewiston. And that includes things like the general cost of operating the locks and dams that is attributable to navigation. It includes dredging, all for basically the Port of Lewiston, because Port of Wilmot doesn't need any dredging. And so that runs about $2 million a year. The last dredging project was over $10 million, and the Corps now has said we need to dredge again. The last one was about 5 years ago. But I did not include in here $33 million that it costs to fund the Snake River compensation plan. And so I'm saying general costs includes, like, the work they're doing now. I mean, the kind of work they're doing happen to be at Bonneville, but when they're doing that on the Snake, I mean, things break and you have to put in a new lock and so forth. And so some of that money. And then there's about 3 million of general fish support going in. And all that comes out to be about 25,000 per barge. If we add the Lower Snake River plan, compensation plan, that's alone is 30 to 33 million. So if we included that, and it's a cost of operating Lower Snake River dams, then we're talking about well over 25,000. And that's all taxpayer money. There's no, it's not like, some shipping comes out of, or some operations of the dams comes out of hydropower. In fact, 90% comes out of hydropower. And so, but I just want you to think about when you see these barges, you and your fellow federal taxpayers are paying about 25,000 minimum. So we'll switch now to hydropower.
Can I ask a question that Freya?
Yes.
How do proponents of breaching the dams sit down at the table with the farmers? Because I'm a proponent of breaching, but I don't want the farmers to lose their livelihood. How do we sit down with them and dialogue and say, can we take some of the subsidy and put it toward putting a pipeline so that the water gets up to your crops? How do we do that? Because right now it just seems we're polarized.
Yes, and I think, here's my take, the farming community and irrigators and so forth, they're not the bad guys, bad gal, they're just out there trying to feed their family. And so, but right now, the last major battle in Snake River was over the dams was in 2002, some of you probably remember that. It was when the Corps did their juvenile survival study. And there were 4 options that they considered: making no change, doing more transportation of yearling fish by barge. I always wondered if they counted that in barge. I guess they do. And then, or fix the dams, or breach. We've done all the other first 3. In fact, fixing the dams, they've spent over $800 million. But as we'll see soon, it's not working very well. So I think farmers have to recognize that they have to get to the table and talk. Until they do, and as long as they think they're going to win this, then that won't happen. And the salmon people, I think, whatever, the salmon and orca folks, this is a last-ditch stand for them. If the dams, all kinds of scientists say if the dams aren't removed, the fish are going to be gone. Especially bee-run, steelhead, sockeye, some of those. So, okay, let's did that answer your question? So now we're going to talk about hydropower. And this is a graph that shows the hydropower situation in the Northwest, all of it. And so to meet required load, in other words, the demand that we have, this graph takes about 83% of the resources that we have. Here it could be, if we took out the Snake River dams, then we're going to lose 3%. And here's our surplus, even after the dams were gone. Now, one interesting thing about this is the situation in a extremely low water year. They call it the 1937 critical water. So in other words, if we went as low as we have, since keeping records with our water, because that's, predicts how much energy can be had, so to speak, then those are the results. Now, if you go to a average year, which seems to me would be, look at that, and then this goes to 21%. This stays about 3, and this is then 24. It's about, what is that? Something's not quite right there. I suspect that number is right. Anyway, I just want you to see that if we took out the dams, we'd still have plenty of power to, so Seattleites could still make coffee. That's the point. Okay. One of our, we just have this great surplus of power coming on the market. And there's a big change going on in the power market. And so this, for example, the Northwest Power Council they have planned their portfolio and how much they're going to need in power and whatnot. Well, we're saving a lot of power through efficiency. Morgan and I bought some new bulbs last week, and they're more efficient than the ones we had up there. And we bought we installed a new air conditioner, and way more efficient than the 20-year-old one. So when we consider all that kind of efficiency savings, by 2020, which is not very far away, they say just through energy savings, we'll save 1,000 megawatts. Okay, all 4 Lower Snake River dams average about 963 over the last 17 years. So it gives you an idea. So just in savings by 2020, we have on our hands the power of all 4 Snake River dams. Now by 2030, look at there. They're saying by 2030, savings alone will be 4,000 megawatts of energy. And that is the equivalent of 16 Lower Snake River dams. Here's where you really see some change going on. Oh, that's good stuff. I do a med every night, and I guess it'd be fair to say I'm on the pill. Anyway, Lord reminds me she's not taking your pill. I could think, well, gee, I wonder, it seems like I was turned around at some point. Anyway, electricity used to sell, well, I'll back up. All the power that is produced by the Lower Snake River dams could be considered as surplus power. The Bonneville Power markets, I mean, they market from 31 dams and a nuclear plant and some other sources. And so they used to sell that as surplus power for about $60 a megawatt hour. So here we are about, roughly through there. Things started to change in 2009, and there was so much power coming on the market that prices fell for surplus power. And they went to now, currently they're about $22. That's on average. I mean, sometimes they can sell power for 100, and sometimes they sell it for as low as minus 19. That is, they pay somebody $19 a megawatt hour to take this power off their hands. They can't turn the dams off without increasing spill. This is, of course, happens in the spring. And so first they shut down wind and they shut down solar, and then they throttle back the nuclear plant, and they have to pay for that to wind producers and solar producers. And then they still have excess power, and so they have to get rid of it because they have to keep a moderate amount of spill going over, or they get nitrogen gas and kill fish. So it's kind of a unique relationship there. So anyway, now it's about $22 on average. And in terms of the Lower Snake River dams, when it was at 60, that produced revenue for them of about $503 million. Today, that same amount of energy would be sold for $186 million. So over 300 million difference in production from those dams. And that's created a real bind for Bonneville. So what did Bonneville do? Well, at first they said, gosh, we don't wanna raise prices, so we're gonna cap our reserves. We've got a pretty healthy reserve, $917 million. And that was in 2007. And then the reserves started going down and down and down and down. Little blip here, because they raised prices, I'll come back to that. And in 2017, they had 5 million in reserves. And they need 300 million to have 6 weeks of operating capital. So they decided that they had to do something, and they were going to add on to the costs each year 20 million, and build that reserve account back up. And of course, that would take 15 years. And they don't have 15 years, so, but just recently, in 2019, over here, they discovered that they had been, in their accounting system, they have power and transmission, kind of operate them as 2 separate businesses. And so they just found this error in their transmission side of the budget and said, gosh, some of this money really belongs with our power side. And so they're in the process now of transferring that money over to their reserve account. And guess what? It's 300 million. So, I'm not an accountant, so it just seems curious to me that, so now they're, theoretically, I think they're back to about 200 million about here. So now, here's what they did with their prices. First, they were subsidizing these prices, and then they said, we gotta start raising prices, and so their prices are set for 2 years, and so currently they're $35.57. And you might want to remember, just remember $35. And so that's how they addressed that problem, and the problem is continuing to grow. One of the problems is what's happened with the cost of wind. And here you can see in 2010, wind cost to produce $87.50. No problem for Bonneville or Solar, other companies are, because that was a pretty high price. But today, in fact, that was 2017, it's $33. It's dropped 62% in price, and all indications are it will continue to drop. One of the interesting things going on is as coal plants are shut down, people are there where those plants are building wind and solar. And that's because all the transmission lines are there. Over in Kittitas County, for example, where Kaiser Aluminum was, and they, and ended their contract with Bonneville Power, cost them $75 million to end it, so they wanted out. And so anyway, now they're putting in a big solar farm because they have the transmission. In wind, Montana said, we have wonderful resources to produce a lot of wind energy, and now we're going to have transmission capabilities because the two Colstrip 1 and Colstrip 2 are coal plants are both closing. And they're closing ahead of time, and it's because they cannot produce with coal any more power that's marketable. And so they're going to close those 2 plants, which leaves a lot of transmission. And Montana said, we're going into the export business, we're going to produce over a few years 5,000 megawatts of power and ship it all to the West Coast. So, and wind is, I suspect the price now is even lower, like I said. So wind, hydropower is simply not going to be able to compete. Here's solar costs, starting out at 161 and 188 rather, and now they're down to 38. And again, if I update that, a lot of these slides, I mostly use slides that I pick off, the Corps site or the BPA site or whatever. And so that's the same thing here. And so the reason in these kinds of slides that I stop where I do basically is, what I can conveniently get a hold of in terms of information. Oh, I might add, in terms of solar, arguments that BPA makes is that we have firm power. And sometimes the wind doesn't blow, sometimes the sun doesn't shine. Now, you've heard that line. And I always add, sometimes the water doesn't flow. But that they say our power is worth more because it's firm, I mean, it's guaranteed essentially. Well, the new plant going in west of Pendleton is a combination of wind, solar, and battery. 292 turbines, wind turbines. I forget how many, what size the solar is, but batteries have come down, you saw those other costs going down. It's come down 82% over the same period. So now they can, have some excess power from solar that they can put in that battery. And then the argument is solar, of course, in the day naturally, and then wind often blows more in the evenings and early mornings. So they can feed that battery, and consequently they can offer firm power. And we're seeing more and more of that going on. Okay. There's a significant problem for Bonneville. They have aging assets, and among those are the Snake River dams. And in 2002, in that juvenile fish migration study, the Corps said that a turbine is good for 35 to 45 years. And then you've got to rebuild it, essentially. And they have a capital budget projection from 2016 to 2030. And they're going to do major rehab at McNary, for example. And let's see, I think one other dam, I don't apologize which right now. And there's no money in that capital budget for any major rehab work on the Lower Snake. I mean, there's like $2 million a year, 2.8 million a year, 3 point, that doesn't, that's Band-Aids. To rehab a turbine, the McNary has a budget of $42 million per turbine. They are redoing a couple of turbines in Ice Harbor. It's the oldest ones, and so they're going to be up to snuff. But the other 22 in the Lower Snake River dams are aging. And here's 2030. And, let me back up a second. So here, if we look at, from 2030, these dams are over their useful life. These are way over their useful life. All the dams except Ice Harbor have been basically run out. I mean, it's an engine with 300,000, it's a Toyota with 300,000 miles. Well, that's not run out of a Toyota. Anyway, but about that, I mean, and so here's the issue. To rehab, in today's dollars, to rehab the Snake River dams, cost would be about $1 billion in today's pricing. So now, fast forward to 2030, and you haven't started any rehab work on these dams. Some of them are over 60 years old by now, and they're not going to last. And to me, what's really unfortunate is that I'm completely convinced that the turbines in the Lower Snake River dams will never be rehabbed. There's no money till at least 2030, and it takes to redo the turbines at McNary. It's going to take 7 years. So start in 2030, get some money for the Lower Snake River dams, and by 2040, we got turbines then 70 years old, and they're not going to last that long. So it's kind of, to me, it's like, if you're not going to rehab those dams, let's shut them down now and save our salmon. Because that's so.
Is the $1 billion to rehab per dam or for all of them?
No, that's for all the Snake River dams. Again,
Before-
I use
before
42 million,
Okay.
as a, but I mean, I couldn't stay, that's exactly, and all of these things, by the way, I'm trying to present a big picture for you to understand. So somebody might say, oh, well, there's a dam there you got wrong. maybe so, I don't think so, but, you know, I like anybody who can point out my errors, because I make quick changes, so, okay. Before, oh,
I have a question on that. When, a hydro turbine is not really a very complicated piece of equipment.
I don't know.
Some-
I know they're big.
They're big, but when they age out like that, I don't know that they just fail, that's kind of what I'm asking.
Oh.
That their efficiency essentially just decreases and their operational availability decreases. So it's not like, I guess I want to know is when they've aged out, do they just die? And we don't have the power generation, or you lose 2% of capacity?
yeah, no, I think when they get less efficient, but also the risk goes way up of cavitation and those kinds of issues that do shut them down.
So you lose some availability, but it's not.
Yeah.
Because I think the Grand Coulee turbines they rehabbed a lot of the old ones.
Yes.
Fairly recently, but they were pretty old when they rehabbed
Yeah.
those, so.
And they're starting in, on rehabbing Grand Coulee now, for, gosh, I forget how much money, huge amount. Okay, well, let's talk about fish. Well, actually, let me wrap up a little bit on BPA. This is why we all have a problem. Bonneville Power is currently 15 billion in debt. 15 billion. It costs huge amounts just to service that debt. They have aging assets that require a lot of capital, which would require expanding their debt. In fact, recently were downgraded by Moody's Investment Service to a negative in terms of their bonds. They can't sell bonds, but they get somebody else to sell bonds, knowing that it's BPA that backs that company. So anyway, they've got, all that debt. They've got, there's 24% of their budget goes to fish. Well, fish and game, fish and wildlife, I mean, maybe a little to something else, but mostly fish. 24% of your budget. And so, to me, I mean, if you can think about a private company that has a product that has fallen prices, and you're saddled with 15 billion in debt, and you have to spend 24% of your whole budget on something that doesn't produce anything for you, and I could add, and that 24% isn't working, it's clearly not working, then I don't see how they can survive. I mean, if they were a private business, they would bail. They'd have to. Okay, Chinook. Let's take a look at what's going on with our fish. And I want to make sure I got the colors right with these. Yeah. The light color here represents spring, summer Chinook. The dark color, steelhead. And this goes to 2018, and let me assure you, it didn't go up. It's not going up this year. I mean, it's going to be down about here. We just got new information from Steve Pettit. Some of you know Steve, and he updates his data every day, I think. But anyway, as of yesterday, at the end of September, the steelhead was running at, over Bonneville, was running at 21% of 10-year average, 21%. And over Lower Granite, again comparing September 30th last year to September 30th, same time frame, 13%. When I was growing up, I used to like to go down and watch the steelhead climb the ladder at Lewiston Dam. Some people forget or didn't know, there was a dam about 4 miles up from the mouth on Clearwater, and it was put in for washing the water power to generate electricity, and it was to create a log pond for potlatch forests. And so the steelhead could seem to manage, the salmon could, that's where our Chinook went. But anyway, that in 1962, I wasn't a kid anymore, I guess, but anyway, in 1962, 43,000 big wild bee-run steelhead crossed that dam. Last year, 558. That gives you an idea of how. So anyway, here's interestingly enough, you probably can't read, this is 1962. Oh, and boy, it started going down, and then it kind of picked up a little, and here's 1975. Of course, those are the years of dam construction. And here's where we are now. We're in serious trouble. Here's sockeye, same pattern. And 2019, I think I read, and again, these numbers just change regularly with, updated, and I try to update them as I go. But anyway, I remember reading at one point, 17 fish had made it back to standing basin. The average over a 5-year period, I think, was 69 fish. So here's where we are right there. And they're, they're about the big out.
Lynn, any hints on the little peaks?
No,
Any clue on
yeah.
the good news?
Often it's water conditions. In other words, if you get a lot of runoff, you get more going over the spillways, and they make it better than going through the turbines, of course, or through the surface collectors. But I haven't really looked at that. Okay, here's some important information to understand. Here's a graph, and this, well, I'll start out with smolt to adult ratio, a return, smolt to adult return. Everything depends on that. And if there's one concept, that we want to focus on, it's smolt. How many, juvenile fish do you send, and how many do you get back? And so, if you're down here, it's called extinction, and that's less than 1%. From 2 to 6% is various levels of recovery. 2% is really kind of hanging on by the fins. Okay? Everybody seems to agree that in order to achieve recovery of these fish, you need from 2% to 6% with a 4% average. So here's where we are. Here's Snake River Chinook, and they crossed that 2% line 2 years out of the last 22. 2 out of 22.
Does like the Columbia water users agree with that you need 4% or 3 or 4%? So like the farmers and the water user groups, they agree with that 4% number too?
That's kind of, I think, universally.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's from the Northwest Power Council, and it's from the the counting station.
Fish Passage Center.
Yeah.
Does that include the hatchery fish?
No, I think this is hatchery fish. Wild fish do better than hatchery fish, they're smarter. So, but the main thing to really understand is that we are just not breaking into that. The SAR for Snake River Chinook, the average is 0.84. That's called extinction. And it's been going on for years. So sometimes we get, dry water conditions and so forth, and sometimes we don't. And this ends in 2015. If I extended that out, it would just be a fall off. So one of the problems is getting juveniles to the ocean. And we all know that 97% of them survive, right? We've seen that on websites, I have, or I've seen it say 95%, or in the choruses from 93 to 95%. That's per dam. And that doesn't include death in reservoirs. So the next time somebody says, well, gosh, it's not a problem, 97% of them survive. Even if 95% were used per dam, and that's an acceptable figure, because they've made improvements. Well, then by the time you go through 8 dams, it's 66%. But that's not counting reservoirs. And so I'm gonna change this, because this was NOAA data. They'll say, well, from, the lower Granite Dam down to McNary, X amount of loss, and from McNary down, and so some of the figures do not include, from hatchery or Nail Stream to lower Granite. Some of them, and that doesn't include what's called delayed mortality. So, but this is just an example. I mean, actual numbers are, this is from one group. So I said from port of origin, let's say we got 1 million smolts at a fish hatchery. And so I was very generous and said, okay, let's say we only lose 10,000 fish. And that puts us down here. Now, and by the time they get to lower Granite. And by the way, Idaho Department of Fish and Game has done a lot of research on that, and they know that from all the hatcheries in the Snake River system to lower Granite, the survival rate is 65%. So you can imagine if I put 65% here. Then we've got from lower Granite Reservoir to lower Granite Tailways there. McNary from the lower Granite Tailways to McNary, there's the loss. I mean, that's the survival, I should say, the number of survival. Then from McNary down through Bonneville, and this is just 1 year's data, but it cuts it down to there. And then we enter, and I should talk about just, total delayed mortality from Bonneville to the ocean. But I just wanted to put this in just so that we remember what happens. We have Sand Island, which is a big island of dredging piles that the Corps of Engineers created when they dredged the Columbia River. And the birds love it. They've got, lots of double-crested cormorants and all birds that eat fish, okay? And so that drops it some more, and then this delayed mortality is the loss from Bonneville to the ocean, from basically attributable to the dams. In other words, they're saying, by the time a salmon juvenile has gone through 8 dams, some of them are physically scarred up, some of them are in shock. They actually measure cortisol in fish and so forth. Well, the research varies quite a bit in a range, they say, from 34% are lost from Bonneville to the ocean to 76%. And so, I use kind of, I use a range now, just using that, so we look at different figures. So I'm going to be revising that, but I just wanted you to understand that, we lose fish in the free-flowing river, we know that. And then they hit the pool at Lewiston, and then it starts going down some more. So, yeah, I would say the best estimate is, I'm saying 16 to 15% survive, something like that. One of the big problems is heat. Salmon requires 68 degrees or colder. And here's the number of days. It's happened to be at Ice Harbor. It'd be probably a little different at Lower Monumental, but not much. It might be higher in John Day. But anyway, these are the numbers of days per year that the water exceeds 68 degrees. And it's a little hard to see, but here, for example, 2015 was a disaster year. And it partly because temperatures got up to 73, 72 and 74 degrees. And at those temperatures, salmon die. At 69 to 70, they often they're more susceptible to disease. 70 to 71, they sometimes stop migrating, just because and they're using up more reserves. And then 73 and 74, they die. In 2015, the minimum estimate that anybody made on salmon, adult salmon deaths was 250,000. So So we boiled 250,000 salmon in Plainview. Currently, the EPA says that their new model for looking at temperature, they said that we now have global warming as well. And so global warming is going to add 0.4 degrees Celsius per decade. So this is a huge problem for our fish. The Fish Passage Center, they're kind of, yes, yeah, I must. Fish Passage Center said that if we took out the Lower Snake River dams and increased spill on the 4 on the Columbia, that we could likely get a 4-fold increase in our salmon. And so here was our spring-summer Chinook, 0.84, you recall. And of course, if you increase that 4-fold, you get up to a little over 3. So now we're in recovery. Slow recovery, but we're in recovery. Steelhead are doing better. Their SAR is average of 1.46. And so if you take that times 4, then you're up here in over 6%, and you see pretty rapid recovery. And
50 years in a blink of the eye.
yeah, right. So here's what we're looking for. The dams do not go across the river, and totally, well, they do, but I mean the concrete doesn't. The dams really were set up such they could be reached. So here we have the spillway and the power plant and so forth, and the lock, and then from here to there is dirt and rock, or it's berm. And so one could take out that berm relatively, I mean, not simply isn't a good word, but that's a doable thing. And in fact, this discussion of a hydraulic breach, that you could lower the river 30 feet, which is as low as you can go with the dams, and then, gradually, so you don't destroy the rail track and so forth. And then, basically, go in there with a track hoe. And I volunteered already, and you would put a notch in that berm, and the river would take it out. So, well, we have our questions as we're going along, but maybe I can.
So, is there any information on what happened with all that soap when you breach it?
Well, we have some examples to look at. And so,
Because it's got to end up somewhere.
yes, and the big source, of course, is Lower Granite. When if you walk around on the levee down there, in 2013, the Corps said we were supposed to have 5 feet of freeboard. Now they say it's 1.5 feet. And so the flood increased, the flood prospect increases. But Lower Granite would certainly produce a fair amount of silt. Not as, the other dams wouldn't as much. But if we look at Elwha, we look at white salmon, these places that they're, white salmon, they just blew a hole in the middle of that dam, and the silt poured out, and it drifted downriver, settled down, and, certainly I'm sure it created some cobbled embeddedness, but within days, the salmon going up too.
Well, I understand the
Yeah.
same, I'm just curious where it's going to end up.
Yeah,
It's going to
yeah.
end up down the other Bonneville dams and,
Yeah, well, of course, if Oregon would like it, if it could get down there somewhere, because they're having a negative impact on their beaches, because where their beaches come from is upriver.
So do you know what commodities are actually being shipped by barge? Because I think most of the wheat growers are using unit trains that now never stop. They
Yeah.
just go back and forth up the Columbia. And I was thinking it was sawdust, maybe?
Well, it's easier to tell you what they're not hauling anymore. They're no longer hauling paper, pulp, pulse, lentils and soybeans and so on. Lumber, logs, that's all gone.
It's only wheat.
Clearwater
It's
paper,
only wheat.
I think I looked at their annual report in 2014 or 15, and at that time, they produced more tonnage in paper and pulp than all the grain shipped out of Lewis. And none of it goes on barge. It's all, it's hard to get a barge to Reno. It's just really tough. So that's what they're not hauling. 93% of what is being hauled is grain, mostly wheat. And that has declined over the last 20 years by 45%. And largely because of unit trains. And so if I'm a farmer and live in Moscow, and I can say, well, I can drive to Oakdale, or I can drive to Lewiston, there's no such thing as really comparing rail with barge. It's all truck rail and truck barge. And the farmer wants to have as little hauled by truck as possible, because that's way far the most expensive transportation part. So, and the farmers keep, building unit train loaders, and every time they do, there's a new one going in at Endicott, 42 miles west of Pullman. Every time they do that, it pulls some wheat off the river, and so it keeps going down. Did that answer the question?
Thank you.
Yeah.
How many farmers are in that 140-mile corridor of the 4 lower Snake River dams? And when you get to the bottom of the last of the 4 lower Snake River dams, is any other farmer affected in any way?
I paid her. Yes.
Good
No, I
question.
didn't. She was
I think
wrong.
it's important
Well,
to look at
yeah.
this.
Well, first of all, one way to look at the Lower Snake River dams is, how often can you find about 19,000 acres of land that now underwater? 19,000 acres is a lot of acreage, and plus it'd be riverfront property, and so that's 140 miles through there, and you'd also have riparian zones on both sides, new riparian zones. When the dams went in, the Washington Department of Fish and Game said we lost in that strip 90,000 songbirds, 120,000 game birds. They did before and after analysis. So how many so anyway, I wanted to mention there is agricultural land that's now flooded. When I was growing up, there were peach orchards just west of Clarkston, and apple orchards, and down in Hawaii was a 550-acre farm. Part of that, not as much now as as there are.
How many farmers are there in that 140-mile?
I don't know.
Approximately.
We can look at the irrigation part. The irrigation system feeds, one time I saw 17 farms, but these farms have expanded and expanded, and they're corporate owned, some of them. One of the 5,500-acre farms that we're helping subsidize the water for was just purchased by the Canadian Teachers Union as an investment. When the pumps first went in, then I would look at, and say such and such corporation and farm, and so a lot of them, some of them are family farms, but 28% of the water was going to a family farm called Potlatch Incorporated. For their poplar, remember all those poplar orchards? That didn't work.
But the local angle on it, our wheat farmers in Latah County, and Lewis County, and Idaho County, almost all their wheat's going out through the barges. The unit trains, like up in Rosalia, that takes from, north of Garfield, say, that's where the wheat goes, that wheat goes out. It's really our local farmers that are using it.
Camas Prairie they're the most vulnerable in a sense. They have to truck some of that wheat by 70 miles from say around Grangeville to get it down to the river. So they're have a significant issue there. But either we're growing a lot less wheat now, or we're shipping. Something's going on because, like I say, the amount of wheat being shipped on the river is declined by 45%.
Because they're growing other crops. They're not just growing wheat, so garbanzos, green peas, dried peas, yellow peas, all those other commodities pick up some of those acreage. The company I work for ships on average about 20 million bushels out of Lewiston. Columbia Grain at the port of Wilma ships about 20 million too. So where do you put that when there's no rail infrastructure? It's all gone.